84% of Americans who carry a monthly budget admit they've blown past it. Almost two-thirds can't even tell you how much they spent last month. And if budgeting happens to be one of your New Year's resolutions, roughly 1 in 4 people abandon that goal before February arrives. This video breaks that cycle for good. Here's what nobody tells you about budgeting. When your budget fell apart, the odds are it wasn't your fault because the system itself was broken. Most budgets operate like crash diets, built too tight, too complicated, and rigged so that one small slip makes you feel like the whole thing is ruined. Behavioral psychologists actually named this phenomenon. They call it the what the hell effect, and it works exactly how it sounds. You overshoot your grocery budget by $10, your brain fires off the signal that the plan is already wrecked, and suddenly ordering takeout on top of it feels completely justified. That identical pattern destroys diets, and it destroys budgets for the same biological reason. What I'm going to walk you through today is a system that sticks, not because it demands more willpower from you, but because it demands less. You can set it up in a single sitting, it bends without breaking when real life happens, and it sits underneath virtually every other financial goal you will ever chase. Whether this is your first attempt or your 7th, this one system is all you need to actually get started. Let's get into it. Before we build anything, I want to spend a minute understanding why budgets collapse, because diagnosing the problem gets us halfway to the fix. 86% of Americans claim they use a budget, according to the Debt.com annual budgeting survey, and that sounds encouraging until you compare it to Gallup's number. Gallup asked a stricter version of the question, specifically whether people keep a detailed written or computerized budget, and that figure drops to about 32%. Even among the people who say they budget, NerdWallet and the Harris poll found that 83% admit to overspending at least sometimes. A massive gap sits between saying I have a budget and actually following one, and there are 3 big reasons for that. The first reason is that people genuinely don't know where their money goes. A penny hoarder survey found that 56% of Americans have no idea what they spent last month, and the subscription data makes that problem even more vivid. When researchers asked people to estimate their monthly subscription costs, the average guess came in at $86, but the actual total averaged $219. That's not a small miscalculation. That's 2.5 times more than people believed they were paying, and 42% had completely forgotten about at least one subscription still hitting their account. The second reason is that irregular expenses ambush people. You build a clean monthly budget, and then your car registration comes due, or the holidays land, or an annual insurance premium arrives. An NYU Stern study found that while people forecast their regular monthly costs with decent accuracy, they spend nearly double what they expected on irregular non-monthly expenses. Bankrate's 2025 Emergency Savings Report confirmed the fallout, showing that 59% of Americans couldn't cover a surprise $1,000 expense from savings. And that's when the cycle kicks in. Build a budget, get blindsided by a cost you didn't plan for, watch the budget blow up, feel defeated, and quit. Reason number 3 is that budgets feel like punishment. When a system runs too tight or too complex, you're fighting your own brain. Among people who don't budget at all, the penny hoarder found that 19% say they lack the time or energy, and another 19% say they're not organized enough for it. NerdWallet's data on Gen Z is even more striking, with 45% of that group calling budgeting flat-out intimidating. And that gets to the core of the problem. Most budgets ask you to track every single penny, lock yourself into rigid categories, and never stray from the plan. And then when you inevitably stray because you're a human being living a real life, the whole structure crumbles. What if the system just didn't work that way? This brings us to the 50-30-20 rule, which is the simplest budgeting framework in existence. Elizabeth Warren and her daughter Amelia Warren Tiag created it back in 2005 in their book, All Your Worth, The Ultimate Lifetime Money Plan. Warren held the position of law professor at Harvard at the time, years before she became a senator, and the entire premise of the book came down to one idea: stop tracking every penny and instead split your after-tax income into just 3 buckets. 50% flows to needs, 30% covers wants, and 20% goes towards savings and debt payoff. That is the whole system, and it takes about 5 minutes to understand. Let me break down each bucket because the specifics matter quite a bit. 50% covers your needs. These are the bills you literally cannot skip. Rent or your mortgage, utilities, basic groceries, and I mean actual groceries rather than the Uber Eats order, transportation costs like your car payment, gas, insurance, or a transit pass, health insurance, minimum payments on any debts you carry, and childcare if that applies. A simple test. If you stopped paying it and something bad would happen, if you'd lose your housing or your car or your electricity, then it counts as a need. 30% covers your wants, which means everything that makes life enjoyable, but that you could technically survive without. Dining out, streaming services, shopping, vacations, concert tickets, and those upgraded versions of things you already have, like choosing organic groceries over the store brand, or buying the nicer jacket instead of the one that just gets the job done. Wants are not the enemy here. They're the reason you work in the first place, and the 50-30-20 rule deliberately builds them in, which is exactly why this framework survives longer than budgets that try to eliminate all the fun. 20% covers savings and debt payoff, including your emergency fund, retirement contributions, extra payments above the debt minimums, and any saving toward medium-term goals like a down payment or a large purchase. Your minimum debt payments live in the needs bucket, and this 20% handles everything above and beyond those minimums. Now here's a detail that trips people up constantly. The 50-30-20 rule applies to your after-tax take-home income, not your salary and not your gross pay. Your take-home number is what actually lands in your bank account after federal taxes, state taxes, FICA, at 7.65% of your pay for Social Security and Medicare, health insurance premiums, and whatever else gets pulled out. Someone earning a gross salary of $60,000 might assume they have $5,000 a month to work, but after all those deductions, the actual deposit could land somewhere around $3,800 to $4,200. That gap of $800 to $1,200 per month is precisely where budgets fracture before they even begin. One quick note on retirement accounts. If you contribute to a 401k through your employer, that deduction hits before you ever see your paycheck. But for 50-30-20 purposes, you'd count those contributions as part of your 20% savings allocation. Take your actual deposit amount, the number that shows up in your checking account, and divide it across those three buckets. That's a working budget, and you just built it. I'd be doing you a disservice by presenting 50-30-20 as a universal solution because it isn't one, and being upfront about that actually makes the framework more useful. The loudest criticism targets the 50% ceiling for needs, because for many households, that number isn't realistic. Rachel Cruz from Ramsey Solutions ran the math on average American spending and found that needs alone consume well over 50% of income in a large number of cases. And if you live in a high-cost city like New York, San Francisco, or Seattle, housing by itself might eat 35 to 50% of your take-home pay before you've purchased a single grocery item. Consider this. Incomes have climbed about 77% since 1999, while rents have soared 129% over that same window, according to Moody's Analytics. The math that worked when Warren published the book in 2005 has gotten genuinely harder 2 decades later. My take on that is straightforward. The 50-30-20 rule functions best as a starting point rather than a commandment. Financial planner Elizabeth Pennington put it well when she said to embrace the idea of the formula without applying it as a mandate, because a rule of thumb is meant to be an entry into the conversation and not the final word. If your needs consume 60%, that's fine. Run a 60-20-20 split, with 60 going to needs, 20 to wants, and 20 to savings. If you're in an expensive metro area and saving 10% is the honest starting line, then 60-30-10 works too. The ratios can flex as much as they need to. What stays constant is the principle. Divide your money into categories with intention and protect at least some percentage for savings before you spend a dime. Any intentional system outperforms no system at all. Before you assign any percentages, there's one step that most people skip, and it happens to be the most important. Track what you're actually spending right now without changing anything about your habits. Just observe. Pull up your bank and credit card statements from the last 30 days, or ideally the last 90, and sort every transaction into categories like housing, food, transportation, subscriptions, shopping, and entertainment. Most banking apps handle the categorization automatically, which means this exercise might take you 10 or 15 minutes total. The point here is not to judge yourself. The point is to discover where you actually stand, because you cannot map a route to where you want to be without first knowing your starting coordinates. And I can almost guarantee you'll be caught off guard by something. Almost everyone is. Remember that subscription stat? People believe they spend $86 a month on subscriptions when the real number averages north of $200. Once you have a clear snapshot of your current spending, hold it up against the 50, 30, 20 buckets. Maybe your needs are devouring 70% of your income, or your wants turned out way higher than you expected, or your savings allocation is sitting at zero. Whatever the picture looks like, now you actually see it, and that awareness becomes the foundation for every adjustment from here forward. Once the 50, 30, 20 framework is running, some people want finer control within those three buckets, and the envelope method is one of the oldest and most effective ways to get it. The concept runs like this. You withdraw cash divided into labeled envelopes for categories like groceries, dining out, entertainment, and gas, and when an envelope empties out, you stop spending in that category until your next paycheck arrives. Dave Ramsey popularized this approach, though the method predates him by decades, and people sometimes call it Grandma's envelope system, because it's genuinely how earlier generations managed household money before credit cards existed. Real neuroscience explains why it works so well. Researchers Drazen Prelek and Duncan Symester at MIT ran an experiment where participants bid on sold-out Boston Celtics tickets, and the group, told they'd pay by credit card submitted bids up to 100% higher, nearly double, compared to those told they'd pay cash. Paying with physical bills triggers what psychologists call the pain of paying, a sensation where you literally feel the money leaving your hands. Cards, whether credit or debit, numb that signal almost completely, and separate research found that people spend roughly 12 to 18% more when they swipe a card instead of handing over cash. Carrying physical cash everywhere in 2026 is obviously not the most practical habit, but digital envelope apps now replicate the same psychology. Good Budget, for example, is a digital version of the envelope system with a free tier offering 20 envelopes and a premium version at $10 a month. ynab and everydollar both use envelope-style logic under the hood as well. This method works best for variable spending categories like groceries, dining, entertainment, and personal care, while your fixed bills like rent and utilities stay better off on autopay. If you're the type who likes full control and wants to account for every single dollar, zero-based budgeting might be a better fit for how your brain works. The setup is clean. Your income minus all planned expenses, including savings and giving, equals exactly zero. Every dollar gets assigned a specific job before the month begins, and nothing sits unaccounted for in your checking account. A guy named Peter Peer invented this method in the corporate world at Texas Instruments back in the late 1960s, and it jumped to government when Jimmy Carter hired Peer to overhaul Georgia's state budget before later applying it at the federal level. Dave Ramsey adapted the concept for household budgets, built his EveryDollar app around it, and ynab's first rule, give every dollar a job, follows the identical philosophy. Total clarity is the advantage here. People running their first zero-based budget frequently uncover $100 to $300 in monthly spending they genuinely cannot justify. The trade-off is time, because the setup demands real effort and ongoing maintenance, especially in the beginning. Ramsey himself says it takes about 90 days before it starts to feel natural. My recommendation is to start with 50-30-20 to build your bearings. And if you find yourself wanting tighter control after a month or two, graduate to zero-based at that point. You don't need to commit to one method permanently. These are tools, not identities. Now let's address the silent budget killer, which is irregular expenses. These are costs that skip months, but are entirely predictable. Car registration, holiday gifts, annual subscriptions like Amazon Prime, insurance premiums that bill quarterly or annually, back-to-school supplies, vet visits, home maintenance, birthday gifts, and that random professional membership renewal. None of them qualify as emergencies or surprises because you know they're coming. But because they don't appear on the monthly calendar, they never make it into the monthly budget. And when they finally land, they blow everything up. More than half of people across all age groups identify unexpected expenses as the thing that throws off their budget, according to WalletHub. The fix goes by the name sinking fund, and the concept is beautifully simple. Take the annual cost of an irregular expense, divide it by 12, and save that amount every single month. Car insurance running $1,200 a year becomes $100 a month into a sinking fund. $600 in holiday gifts turns into $50 a month starting in January. Annual subscriptions totaling $300 break down to $25 a month. You can manage these with separate savings sub-accounts at your bank, virtual envelopes inside a budgeting app, or a basic spreadsheet. The method genuinely does not matter. What matters is that December stops ambushing you because you've been setting aside $50 a month for gifts since January. Out of everything in this video, sinking funds will probably do more to keep your budget intact than any other single tactic, because they convert those unexpected expenses into completely expected ones. This section is for the freelancers, the gig workers, the commission-based salespeople, the seasonal employees, and anyone else whose income shifts from one month to the next. Over 76 million freelancers work in the U.S. right now, according to Upwork, representing about 36% of the total workforce, and the Federal Reserve found that nearly a quarter of consumers report their income changing somewhat or a lot from month to month. This is not a niche problem. If your income varies, here's the most reliable approach built in 3 steps. Step 1. Pull up your last 3 to 6 months of earnings and find the lowest earning month in the bunch. That number becomes your budget baseline, not the average, but the floor, because budgeting off an average and then hitting a below-average month puts you in trouble immediately. Step 2. Build a bare-bones budget from that floor number. Cover your essentials first, meaning housing, utilities, food, transportation, and insurance, then assign whatever remains. Step 3. In the months where earnings run higher than your baseline, take the surplus and deposit it into a buffer account. Think of it as paying yourself a consistent salary from a holding account where all income flows in first and you transfer a set amount, your baseline budget, into checking on a regular schedule. ynab labels this a variable income fund, and the goal is to build up 1 to 2 months of living expenses in that buffer so you're never budgeting against money you haven't earned yet. Ramsey also recommends that people with irregular income target 6 months of expenses in their emergency fund rather than the standard 3, which creates an even larger cushion during lean stretches. The core insight is that irregular income doesn't disqualify you from budgeting. It simply means you budget conservatively and let the strong months build your safety net. If you take one concept from this entire video and put it into action today, make it this one: pay yourself first. The idea traces back almost 100 years to a book called The Richest Man in Babylon by George S. Clason, published in 1926. One sentence captures the core lesson: a part of all I earn is mine to keep. Clason's character Arkad teaches that you should save at least 10% of your income before spending a dime on anything else, and that principle has held steady for a century. A more modern version of the same wisdom gets widely attributed to Warren Buffett. Do not save what is left after spending, but spend what is left after saving. Putting this into practice comes down to automation. Set up an automatic transfer from your checking account to your savings account that fires on payday before you see the money, before you can spend it, and before your brain even registers it as available cash. The reason automation works so well ties to a principle called status quo bias. Researchers Brigitte Madrian and Dennis Shea studied what happened when companies automatically enrolled employees in 401k plans instead of requiring them to opt in, and participation more than doubled. 76% of those auto-enrolled workers stuck with the default contribution rate without ever changing it. They didn't adjust the amount, and they didn't opt out. Saving simply became the default, and people followed the default. Richard Thaler, who took home the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2017 for his work in behavioral economics, built an entire program around this concept called Save More Tomorrow. Participants committed in advance to automatically increase their savings rate each time they received a raise, and after just 4 pay raises, those participants had gone from a savings rate of about 3.5% to 13.6%. People who declined the program stayed stuck around 6%, despite working in the same offices at the same income levels. The only variable separating the two groups was whether savings happened automatically. Thaler's mantra boiled down to 7 words. If you want to get people to do something, make it easy. So make saving easy by automating it, even if the starting amount is just $20 per paycheck. The dollar figure matters far less than the habit itself. And once that money moves to savings automatically, spending what's left stops feeling restrictive. It starts feeling like freedom because the important part already happened without your involvement. Let me run through the tools that help you actually execute everything we've covered. If you prefer the envelope method and want a free option, Good Budget gives you 20 digital envelopes at no cost. Zero-based budgeting with training wheels lives inside Everydollar by Ramsey Solutions, which offers a free tier limited to manual entry, while the premium version with automatic bank syncing runs about $80 a year. Many people consider ynab, which stands for You Need a Budget, to be the gold standard in this category, and it costs $109 a year with a 34-day free trial. Every feature revolves around zero-based budgeting, and the 4 rules I mentioned earlier. They claim the average new user saves $600 in the first month alone, and college students get a full year at no charge. Monarch Money replaced Mint for a large number of users and runs about $100 a year. Mint's first product manager actually founded it, and the platform handles budgeting, investment tracking, and net worth monitoring all in one place. On the free end, Empower, which used to go by Personal Capital, offers a completely free financial dashboard. Investment tracking is where it shines brightest, but the spending tools are solid and the cost is genuinely zero. If forgotten subscriptions are your main leak, Rocket Money specializes in hunting those down and canceling them, and they claim to have killed about 2.5 million subscriptions across their user base. One note worth flagging: Mint is gone. Intuit shut it down in March of 2024 and funneled users to Credit Karma, which is free, but does not actually include budgeting features. You cannot create a budget or set spending limits inside Credit Karma, so if you've been floating without a tool since that migration, now is the time to pick a replacement. And honestly, a plain Google Sheet handles budgeting just fine. No subscription fees, no sharing bank credentials, full customization and free templates are everywhere. Don't let the tool decision turn into another reason to put this off. Before wrapping up, I want to hand you a real benchmark to measure yourself against. The Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes the Consumer Expenditure Survey every year, and the 2024 data, which is the most recent available, dropped in December of 2025. $78,535 is what the average American consumer unit, which roughly translates to a household, spent in 2024. That works out to about $6,500 a month on a pre-tax income of approximately $104,000. Here's how that spending breaks down. Housing claims the largest share at 33.4%, which is about $26,000 a year. Transportation follows at 17%, totaling over $13,000 when you add up car payments, gas, and auto insurance. Food comes in third at nearly 13%, roughly $10,000 a year split about 60-40 between groceries and eating out. Personal insurance and pensions account for 12.5%, and healthcare takes about 8%. Just those top 3 categories, housing, transportation, and food, consume 63% of the average household's total spending. The BLS themselves summarized it bluntly. Housing and transportation accounted for 50% of household spending in 2024. That is exactly why budgeting experts focus so heavily on the big 3. Shaving even a small percentage off housing, transportation, or food moves the needle far more than canceling your Netflix account ever will. You should still audit your subscriptions, absolutely, but keeping perspective on where the real money flows matters a great deal. Let's bring the whole thing together. If you're starting from zero, here's your action plan in 5 steps. Step 1 is to calculate your actual take-home pay, meaning the deposit that hits your bank account and not your gross salary. Step 2 is to spend 30 days tracking your current spending without changing a thing, just pure observation. Step 3 is to apply the 50-30-20 framework with 50% to needs, 30% to wants, and 20% to savings, adjusting the ratios to fit your actual situation. Step 4 is to set up sinking funds for your irregular annual expenses by dividing each one by 12 and saving that amount monthly. Step 5 is to automate your savings so that the money moves on payday without requiring any action or willpower from you. 5 steps total, and you can start on the first one today. Here's what I really want you to walk away with. A budget is not a punishment and it's not a restriction. A budget is a plan that gives you permission to spend, because when your savings are automated and your bills are accounted for, every remaining dollar belongs to you guilt-free. That's what budgeting actually delivers. Not less freedom, but more of it. Being imperfect at this is completely fine. Ramsey says it takes about 90 days to get comfortable with budgeting, so your first month will be messy, your second will improve noticeably, and by month 3, the rhythm starts to click. Perfection was never the target. Awareness and intention were. Nearly 95% of Americans say budgeting matters more now than ever before, and 84% of people who budget report that it helped them avoid or climb out of debt. The data lines up clearly. This works. Any budget, even a rough and imperfect and I'm still figuring this out budget, outperforms no budget at all. And this single habit is the foundation sitting underneath every other financial goal you'll ever set. Building an emergency fund, paying off debt, saving for a home, retiring someday, all of it starts right here with this one skill. Pick a system, start simple, and adjust as you go. A budget is not about tracking every penny. A budget is about making sure your money moves in the direction you actually want it to. I've got a full breakdown on building your emergency fund linked right here, plus another one covering how credit scores actually work. I'll see you in the next one.